What's the difference between a regulated and a dysregulated state of your nervous system? First, it's important to grasp that we are talking about states, which means it's fluctuating, it's not permanent. You can feel well regulated in one moment, something happens, you're triggered, and you feel dysregulated in another moment, okay? And we're talking about something that you are building. It's about building capacity. Nervous system regulation is not about calming yourself down as fast as possible, like getting into a dysregulated state and then returning to a regulated state as quickly as possible. It's much more about building your capacity to stay regulated. That's the goal of nervous system regulation. And so a really important distinction is that a regulated nervous system doesn't mean that you're not experiencing intensity. You can feel intense emotions, anxiety, anger, frustration, rage, grief, whilst being in a regulated state of your nervous system. Okay? This is really important. And on the flip side, being in a dysregulated state doesn't equal just intense emotions. Like if you're feeling sad, if you're feeling agitated, if you're feeling overly excited, that doesn't equal dysregulation. It's important to look a bit closer here. Dysregulation, to define it a bit more, means that you're experiencing something and your emotional, somatic, sensational experience is too much for your system to handle. It overrides your nervous systems and your body's capacity to contain the experience. Which means the experience can't be processed, can't properly be integrated in your consciousness, and thus you're left with fragments, different fragments and pieces of the experience swirling around in your system, different sensations that don't know where they belong, different emotions that are being stored somewhere. And so a regulated state means, on the other hand, that the experience that you're having, be that an intense emotional experience, you're moving through grief, you're moving through rage, anger, frustration, intense excitement that is hard to contain. However, if your nervous system capacity is huge enough to contain that, you're in a regulated state, your system knows how to process it. It has the capacity to integrate those different sensations, emotions, the entire experience within your consciousness. So it makes sense. So it paints a coherent, whole picture, okay? So this is really important. Again, repeating myself. Regulated nervous system doesn't mean the absence of intense emotions. Dysregulated nervous system doesn't equal intense emotions. Okay? Really important. So something else that I want to bring up in this video here, which is also essential, is dysregulation isn't dangerous and you don't have to avoid dysregulation. It's actually healthy to fall out of your window of tolerance, so to speak, to leave your capacity so that you grow. However, it's important to take care of yourself and to get back into a regulated state, because what's actually dangerous is staying in a dysregulated state for prolonged times. If you're dysregulated because there's a trigger, some kind of event that just overrides the capacity for you to move through it gracefully. And then you're feeling very dysregulated. You don't know how to handle the overwhelming sensations. And then you can either shoot out on top of your window of tolerance into hyperarousal, which is usually the case. Oftentimes we then, after too much hyperarousal, we drop down into hypoarousal, too little energy, apathy, because it's all too much for our system to handle. And so when we're either down here in dysregulation or up here in dysregulation, in the middle would be regulation, that's when trauma happens. So this too much energy, hyperarousal or hypoarousal, needs to be discharged so that we can return to a state of coherency, harmony, balance, integration, regulation. We're talking about the same thing in different terms, however you want to name it, right? So that's important. Dysregulation is not dangerous, and you don't have to avoid dysregulation. You don't have to be afraid of dysregulation. It's actually healthy for your system to be pushed out of regulation sometimes. But you have to have the proper framework, you have to have the proper foundations and resources laid out, that you know that you have the ability, the possibility, the opportunity to actually return to regulation. Because if you don't, that's when trauma happens. That's when your experience becomes really fragmented and it's hard to put the pieces where they actually belong. And even if that happens, there's a way out of it, okay? I really want to emphasize this. And one more thing that's important in context of this whole work, nervous system regulation, building your capacity. This is the very goal of nervous system regulation, is to actually build capacity so that your body, your system, feels a grounded sense of safety when you're moving and being with intense emotions and somatic sensations. So that's the goal, increasing your capacity. And it's so important that this is done step by step, okay? Step by step. Little by little. We can't rush this process. It takes time, it takes repetition, it takes consistency, and it's well worth it. Because then we can handle life with much more grace, much more easygoing, and it turns out to be so much more beautiful. Doesn't mean that we're not experiencing intensity or shutdowns, but it means we know how to hold ourselves without feeling like the rug is being pulled underneath our feet. That's important. If you feel like someone's pulling the rug underneath your very feet, that's a sign of dysregulation and looping in trauma. Healing feels, yes, uncomfortable, feels expansive and contractive, or can be feeling like that, but it doesn't feel like you're facing the abyss every single day. That's being trapped in a trauma loop. So nervous system regulation means building your capacity to be with more sensations, to be with more life. Ending on that note, Felix checking out with my lovely assistant here, and see you in the next video.